If people get disengaged, the number one reason that people get disengaged or leave a company is bad managers, right? It's they're
Yeah.
working for people that they don't trust, they're not inspired by, they're not learning from, they're not treated well by these people. And I think there's an epidemic of lousy leadership and lousy middle management, across the globe, arguably.
Yeah.
And, I think that's creating disengagement. And part of it is, maybe we don't do, the kinds of, really deliberate management training processes that we used to. I don't think we do actually. Like, I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of organic, kick them in the water and
Yeah.
like, hey, listen, we're going to throw you in the deep end,
Yeah.
figure out how to be a manager. You can maybe do that, with a salesperson. Like, we're going to throw you out in the market and you
Yeah.
figure it out, or a marketing person. But a leader, that's a hard thing to do for them to learn on the
Yeah.
job.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm thrilled to welcome Jay Lauf, co-founder of Charter, to our podcast this afternoon. Jay, I know you are a veteran media executive and now co-founder of Charter, a growing force in transforming the workplace. I myself love hearing from different kinds of executives that come up in the workforce from different angles. So certainly your background as a media executive is new to me. So I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on this subject that cuts across all industries, I would say, leadership and performance.
Thank you. Yeah, I am too. And being in media sometimes gives you a window into a lot of different
Right.
industry spaces. So we'll interested to see where we go.
Yes, me too, me too. All right. So what I love from meeting you and learning about Charter is that you're focused on the new rules of leadership in the era that we're in, including with AI and the disruption that's coming with that. So I thought, like, let's just jump in and get your thoughts on, and how do you talk about these new rules and what is that all about?
Yeah, yeah. I think, the new rules of leadership to me are old practices that I've, put
Yes.
into place for many, many years, but I think are more at the forefront. So it's less about sort of tops down, direction where you're sort of being very prescriptive about here's what we're going to do and here's how you're going to do it. But it's much more sort of, I think new rules of leadership are adaptability, are degrees of, sort of humility and collaboration, again, versus sort of this
Mhm.
separate. I think there's sort of a stratified approach in the past, but I think you need to be part of the team. And I think that requires a degree of humility to be part of the team and to be really collaborative. I think empathy and therefore
Mm.
versions of generosity, and maybe I'll go back to the generosity thing in a minute, I think are critical. Curiosity,
Mm.
and I think trust is another big piece of it, which is, again, maybe not, it's not a new rule of leadership, but I think it's an essential, is that you
Mhm.
have to engender trust among the people that work for you to be an effective leader today. So
Yeah,
those are
interesting.
among the sort of, I don't know if those are rules or characteristics, but
Yeah.
we can maybe from there jump into rules. Yeah.
Yeah, but those are all very powerful, themes and elements of being, and keys to success of being a leader today. I mean, I actually totally agree, but those are hard to build. Let's say build, measure, manage,
Yeah.
and the fact that you're talking about building them as a new approach takes me to thinking a little bit how we've stepped away from some elements of, basic human ways. Let's say. So I would just love to know a little bit more about how you're building that. How are you building these kind of, like, what many would see as intangible yet critical qualities for
Yeah, and
leaders?
I
Mhm.
think that's a really important point to your point,
Mhm.
that they can seem intangible, theoretically unmeasurable.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we talk a lot about at Charter is being really, really deliberate at managing outcomes over hours. So I guess the
Mhm.
one bit that I left out of there, I think one of the new rules of leadership is, I think clarity and around accountability. What
Yes.
is the thing you need to be really clear? What is the thing you're going to measure as success? Make
Mhm.
sure that that is as objective as it can be, is clearly and consistently and regularly communicated to the people on the team, so that there's no ambiguity about, what success looks like. There's no question that that is a critical, piece of the
Mhm.
new rules of leadership. I think from there, once you've established that, the sort of the human traits that I sort of cited before, which again maybe
Yeah.
are less rules than traits, can ladder up into that goal. But
Yeah.
without goal setting at the outset, it can be sort of an exercise in far too much subjectivity. There's
Yeah.
no question about it. So I think that's a critical point that you lead me to there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, bringing people, that's interesting. Again, going back to outcomes, right? So we're going to focus, getting people focused on outcomes, getting them focused there. We're going to measure against that. That's a really
Mhm.
powerful concept. But many ways, these are classics, right? Like these are like the fundamentals and classics. What do you think has happened to create in the world that's like making us say this is the new, the new way, right? Like, 'cause it's almost like this is actually what is many ways going back to what should be there as a foundation, right?
Yeah, well, again, I think, maybe, and I keep, dancing around this notion of, their traits versus rules. But if we want to
Fair,
turn
yeah.
those traits into rules, one of the rules of leadership is to be adaptable, right? So
Yes.
that is a rule. I think that's incredibly important. I
Yeah.
think, adopting and deploying a version of the golden rule is a relatively new concept in management, because you think very often like, well, no, the golden rule means, you're just giving everybody a pass. Golden rule to me, if you really think about what that is treat other people the way you'd like to be treated
Mhm.
yourself. I don't know about you, but I think any kind of highly productive, high functioning professional adult actually likes accountability,
Yeah.
wants goals. If they are either making a mistake or racing too fast in the wrong direction, they want somebody to
Mhm.
give them feedback. I think we're in a
Yes.
culture where people are eager for feedback. So the golden rule doesn't mean that you're soft on people. It actually can mean that you're actually really, you
Yeah.
have a high standard and you're holding people to that standard.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people want to be held to that standard to get better at what they do, to have successful careers, to just develop as human beings. And I think those are relatively new ways, therefore new rules of looking at leadership versus, again, just sort of a dictatorial sort of a thing where you get up in front of a group meeting or you send out a
Mhm.
memo and say, here's what we're doing,
Do
here's
this,
what you
do
need to
this.
be
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And that's it. And good
Yeah.
luck doing it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you whether you're doing it well or not. It's a much more roll up your sleeves, empower people approach that I think is fun.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me. You're empowering, and I would say equipping people, right, to be. And I love I love the focus on adaptability. But ultimately, this day and age, there's almost no playbook for what's going on, right? Like, and the change is happening. How many new things are coming at us? So to me, it seems like this is a new shift on these adaptable, resilient skill sets, so that everybody's equipped to make their own next best decision versus that just being handed down, hierarchically to do this, and everybody was happy. Like those days are gone, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think, so, it's wrapped up in what we're talking about is vulnerability, right? I think it's a really
Mm,
difficult place for a leader, especially young and first time in new leaders, to
mhm,
be vulnerable by admitting, I don't necessarily have all the answers here right now, or I may learn as much from you as you will learn from me. And that's where those words like humility and generosity come into this. And again, I think they can sound like just sort of soft, squishy,
right.
kinds of words, but they're actually, there's a real practical, hard-nosed practical outcome that comes
Yes.
from those. One of the examples I think about all the time being in media, you mentioned media.
Hmm.
So media is a young, youthful industry. And whether it's, I've worked at The Atlantic, at Wired Magazine. I was one of the co-founders of Quartz. And at each of those places, we had probably an outsized percentage of 20 somethings on our teams always. And what I
Hmm.
used to always tell them is never be afraid to speak up in group meetings, because you have a pass right now as a
Yeah.
relatively, if you're a new employee
Yeah.
and or if you're a new worker, you get to ask the dumbest question in the room without people dismissing you.
Yeah.
And the dumbest question in the room often ends up being the smartest question in the room, right? It's usually a
Yeah.
why question. And so I think, leaders having the humility, the capacity to
Hmm.
leave room for people to do that so that you and the whole organization can learn has never been more poignant than it is right now in an age of AI and all the other things that are
Yeah.
disrupting the workforce.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not as researched on that element as you are, I'm sure, but I know as a leader, I always prided myself on leading with vulnerability. And it was just, it's just how I am, and that's just how I go forward. But I remember distinctly situations where something really got serious, got thrown to me and my team. And as a leader, everybody's kind of looking at you. You can tell they're trying to put on a bright face, like, And then I would be the first one to say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know. I've never done this before." And
Yeah.
you can almost hear the room like take a breath, like, like weight off their shoulders. Like she says that she has never seen it. So, okay. And then real growth starts, right? That's when you really start, okay, what do you think about it? What do you know about this? And then, that's action is created and in that breath, right? So I really like that I think that it's really powerful what you're highlighting there.
Yeah, and it's, one of the windows I have into this is we convene a lot of live programming. We do a lot of journalistic reporting, and
Mhm.
we certainly glean some of these insights from academic research and case studies. But one of the things that strikes me is we do a lot of live convening. We do summits. And typically they're New York based and live streamed, but the leaders that we're having on our stage, whether it's a Jared Spatero from Microsoft or a Katie George from McKinsey, now actually Microsoft also. I mean, I could go on and on with the list of people. It's one of the themes that comes up again and again and
Oh,
again
cool.
from these people who are at, companies, McKinsey, Microsoft, who are certainly measuring outcomes. And one of their strongest convictions is that the ability to listen, learn, lead with, empathy and humility is not and not a nice to have or not sort of a sociology notion. It's an actual practical business imperative.
Yeah, and it's teachable, it's learnable. So
Mhm.
that's what I think I would say you're sharing and Charter is doing, which I think is also a very empowering message to share. Sometimes people think you're just born this way, right? Like, oh, that guy or that girl is you
Mhm.
just get it or you're born and how lucky for you, you're growth minded, curious, all the beautiful things you mentioned. But actually, I also have talked about that these are skills and habits that we can hone and learn. Different people, that's where we're born, certainly with certain inclinations, and we kind of build on them. That's where self awareness comes in and, some of the work you have to do. But I think it's a very empowering message to share with others that these critical skill sets for success in today's world are actually learnable.
Yeah, I think I agree with that point, and I think especially listen, everything's arguably more readily learnable, the earlier in your life and your
Right.
career. It's not
Of
to say
course.
that
Yeah.
people of my vintage can't learn.
Everything's easier when you're younger.
I'm proud of the fact that, that I'm a kind of a
Yeah.
lifelong learner and have a front row seat, through
Mhm.
media, you have a front row seat to new ideas all the time. It's one of the things I've loved most about this. But I just remember always, when I would have first time managers on our team, and one of the hiring requirements I used to have for them is
Mhm.
before you can hire somebody, I need you to tell me what they are better than you at.
Mhm.
And, they'd look at me quizzically because their thinking is like, I need to hire somebody who's junior to me, who I can mold and who I can teach. This is, I'm going back 10,
Right.
15 years ago. And I say, get them to think about the fact that no, your success is now wrapped up in the performance of all these other people.
Mhm.
When I come to, judge you slash work with you around like, are you doing your job well or not? It's going to be whether these teammates of yours are succeeding. And so rather than thinking about, how can I have, somebody on my team that again I can sort of shape and
Yeah.
mold, and it's who can I learn from? Who's actually going to take me places I would not
Mm.
be able to go on my own? And I think
Right.
that mindset opens up, all of the things that we're talking about
Yeah.
here, around adaptability and curiosity, and
Yeah.
openness and being part of a team versus, purely a leader,
Yeah.
sitting
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
office.
And actually, sometimes it's even like looking at my young kids growing up, in whatever they call them, AI native or tech native, right? Like I'm learning from my kid how to do a video better, faster, right? Like, so
Yeah.
age is not the indicate that, that old school thinking, let me get someone younger that knows less than me is actually right out the window, right? Like we can't think like that.
Right. But yeah, so there's that. There's like the release of that sort of
Hmm.
arrogance and hierarchy, but it's also the recognition that whether it doesn't even we're using age in this instance as a proxy, but it's like just new points of view.
Yeah.
Being open to new
New points
points
of
of
view.
view
Yes.
is so
Yes. Yes.
critical, because if you're in your echo chamber and you're in your bubble and you're all
Yeah.
kind of reinforcing it together all the time, you're never going to grow. You're never going to do anything different. And I think so. But the only way to create conditions where people feel okay to,
Hmm.
to refute the echo chamber is if you're creating an environment, a condition, a set of rules, back to your first
Hmm.
question, that allows for that allows for new ideas, disagreement, mistakes, all of those things that just, give people a sense of let's call it psychological safety,
Yeah.
job security, to take some risks. It's such a critical element of leadership right now.
Absolutely. So now we've talked about these individual characteristics, right? They're building a leader, but now you're talking about also having like almost a culture around it that sustains and supports that as
Yes.
an ongoing basis, right? So we're starting to move into like it's a bit of a multidimensional, if you will, approach that's needed to really build and sustain leadership in an organization. That's makes sense, right? But it's
Yeah.
not easy to do, is what I would guess, which is probably why you're also partnering with organizations and helping with this. Big lift probably needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, how do you think, so I would ask you is like, when you're partnering, how do you view the internal leadership development with versus, kind of like external support? Like either is it hiring leaders coming in to help put in, lift faster or partnerships like you drive a charter that really help support what's really needed to build this ecosystem?
Yeah, and by the ecosystem, you mean like our own internal
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
approach in ecosystem. Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, in our case anyway, it's a little bit less about like external forces and more about how we show up and lead internally. Now
Mm,
that does manifest itself in terms of the ways you deploy various partnerships. And again, I think it goes back to the reason I'm so always fixated on those, those traits and character, those parts of the
yeah.
rules, is they can also show up in partnerships, because if you approach those from a,
Yeah.
okay, it's truly
Absolutely.
going to be a partnership, and or I'm curious about, okay, what are the ways that this partnership can open new avenues and new doors for us. Those are critical to, I think, getting the most out of them. But the other thing that's equally critical, and I think now as we start to talk about organizationally versus individual leadership, this is where goals and KPIs are
Yes.
mission critical,
Mm,
because there are a lot of different external partnerships you can have that seem ambiently like that they're gonna yield some benefit for you. But unless you know what you're driving at and what you're
yeah.
going to measure, you can end up, wasting a ton of time.
And money.
3 years in, you're like, okay, I'm still sort of fostering this relationship and making time for it. And maybe there's even, money being transacted, but it's actually not getting you where you need to go. So that's where the goal setting piece of this and measuring the outcomes and doing it regularly and consistently is such a critical piece of leadership in my mind.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I would say that there is definitely, I feel like kind of a wave of recognition for this that wasn't there, I don't know, put years on it, or at least definitely not decades ago. So I just wonder, is there any kind of top of mind key KPIs or metrics that you can share with us to just help others open up this kind of thinking? Because others would think sometimes there's a thought that these are not measurable things or they're
Yeah.
intangible, and people are struggling with putting numbers to it, be it in whichever way or ultimately down to dollars. So yeah, I just would love to tap into your experience here. If there's some favorites or top of mind things that you can share with us.
Yeah, I mean, let me use some from my industry,
Mhm.
because it's the only industry I've been in for a long time.
Perfect. Of course. Yeah.
But I think you can extrapolate this into your own. To your point,
Yeah.
what are we driving at? I think there's sort of two main goals for charter. One is the mission that gets everybody up and energized every morning, which is to help transform workplaces to be, the way we say it in full, more fair, more dynamic, so that
Hmm.
all workers and thereby your companies can thrive. That's the mission of charter as a journalistic and research institution.
Nice.
As a business, the objective obviously is to be profitable.
Yeah.
And that's the easy one to measure, right? Is like, you
Right.
can measure profit is a number that, the two columns of the spreadsheet either line up or
Yeah.
they don't. So that is the thing we measure for sure. But what I think we're really good at is, I think at the individual level, at the department level, and then we'll have sort of three pillars maybe at those levels. There are other goals that ladder up to and eventually are going to result in
Cool.
profitability, right? And so I think that's where we try to be crystal clear, and we try to be
Yeah.
consistent at setting and reinforcing what those are. And again, to be illustrative, in our world, one of the things that's a marker of you're beginning to have the kind of impact that we want to have on workplace transformation and is likely to lead to, financial success, is the size of your subscriber base. So
Mm.
we obviously measure that's easy because that's numerical, right? Like, how many
Yeah.
more subscribers are we getting? But from there, we break down, how many of those are paying subscribers? How many of those are return,
Yeah.
what is our email open rate? And, are the same people, like, is the frequency of that
Mhm.
open rate, being driven by the same people or different people? So looking at those kinds of goals all ladders up to a big, okay, we're trying to create a big, healthy audience that's part of a community, and we measure that. Within
Mhm.
that, you may have somebody who's responsible for quality content that
Right.
then drives
Mhm.
subscriptions, or you may have somebody who's actually responsible for social media that drives subscriptions. And each of those has a
Mhm.
different and separate goal. The quality content person might be measured on, how many people that read their content convert to a subscriber. And,
Mhm.
somebody in the social media sphere may be the same thing. What's the reach of
Yeah.
the posts we're developing through
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
media,
Totally.
and how many of those convert. So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question, but
totally.
there's
I
different
mean, to
ways
me,
to break it.
I'm a systems thinker. So to me, it's like right away you gave a really beautiful framework. You're literally like, what are we trying to do? Ultimately make a business, right? And then you introduce kind of org, team, individual level. So then how you when you translate those business outcomes, you propagate what's the chain of value that's being created and then apply it to each level. So it consistently percolates down and then up back up into the results of the organization. So
Precisely.
yeah,
That's exactly
okay.
right.
So that's beautiful, and you're right, like, that creates really it's, every to each org on its own because you have to figure out what that is, your industry, your organization, but it's the same line of thinking that will drive the right answer, right? Like, the right answers.
Exactly, and even, like, role descriptions,
Mhm.
team growth, all ladders
Yeah,
up to that. So if we're gonna bring on a new teammate, are they going to be on board to service any one of these goals or not? And
right.
then if so, in what way? And how can we measure that so that they know they're on track, that they
Yeah.
know that they're being, productive? And I think, yeah, it's layers deeper than I think, where organizations can kind of sprout up like weeds.
Yes.
And if you're doing that, I think it just undermines the organization,
Yeah.
the leadership, and the approach to hitting your goals.
I mean, I love that because one of the premises I'm also looking to amplify and including with these conversations is the idea that, spot developing leaders is not the path to organizational performance. If you want
Right.
org-wide performance, you have that alignment across the organization. It looks different in depending on your role, your team, your function, but it's got to be connected and drive alignment so that everybody's decisions are moving the needle in unison across forward, right? So
Exactly.
I think it's such an important highlight in this conversation. And
Yes.
I personally appreciate
That's
appreciate
great.
you
Yeah, yeah,
sharing.
that's great.
Yeah, we're so aligned on that. So I know Charter published research on sustainable performance cultures. That's something again I'm really interested in these days because longer term sustainable performance is really where individuals and organizations win in the longer term. I kind of have the thing where everybody can deliver something fast, but can you deliver it in a healthy, repeatable, longer term frame is
Mm,
what really sets us up for longer. So I just wonder what I would love to pick your brain on that a little bit because, of course, you're coming at it from such a different perspective. So just like, what does that mean to you? What do you see, people that are winning in this way, in the longer term way, are doing differently than those that are not and are, subject to some of the tough numbers out there for like disengagement, burnout, and these other things that really threaten the performance sustainability these days.
yeah, yeah. At the risk of, hammering it again, I'm going to say
Yeah.
this just briefly and then move back,
Yeah.
ladder back to
Yes.
the things you're
Uh-huh.
talking about. I think, sustainable high performance again requires really thoughtful and clear goal setting and
Yeah.
communication. Again,
Agreed. Yeah.
I just keep saying that over and over again
Yeah.
because to me that's really it. But yeah, on the sustainability piece, I think it's recognizing, all of the research that's been out there now for, 20, 30 plus years around, what human beings, what the capacity of human beings. I think it was I might be wrong, but I think it's a Stanford study that shows like you can do 55, 60 hours a week as a steady diet in relatively short bursts. You've got a project to get out the door,
Yeah.
let's call it a 6 week burst. You've got this project, you've got to get out the door, it's got to be delivered, and people can do that. And think about that 50, 60 hours. A lot of the consultants I work with, or there's the 996 thing that we've written about too, right?
Yeah.
We've got
Yeah.
the startup culture in Silicon Valley. It's like 50, 60 hours. That's wimpy. But
Yeah.
actually, if you've ever actually done that, which I've
Yeah,
done, many, many times.
agreed.
It's a lot. It takes a lot of, especially, you factor in your
Definitely.
stage of life. If you have kids, if you're in the sandwich generation and you're taking care of
Yeah,
both parents and children, or you've got a long commute, whatever the thing is, all the research says that after that 5 or 6 week period, it's just diminishing returns. Every
yeah,
hour that you put
yeah,
in above and beyond that is actually a less productive hour and
yeah,
making you less productive in the productive hours. So I think,
yeah,
part of it is just recognizing that and being thoughtful around flexibility. To me, is a piece that's here to stay. One thing that I've noticed, I don't subscribe to this trope and this notion that, Gen Z and millennials are lazy, not the ones I work with. They're the exact opposite. Guess what? They don't want to be chained to their desk from
agreed.
9 to 5,
Yeah,
5 days a week. And I understand that. I used to see engineers on my team who, like, 3 in the afternoon would be playing video games. And, it used to annoy me at first, but then I would see on a Trello
yes,
board the progress they were making from 11 p.m. till 1 in the morning, because that was their biorhythm. And I used to think, why am I keeping let them go to the gym or go play their video game at home or go
yes,
grocery shopping, like anything. Why are they sitting at this desk if they're going to just work later? So I think it's just reimagining
yeah,
all of that around, flexibility. People, and that's what the research will also show.
yeah,
People want a degree of autonomy, and the data shows, like, it's number, two, sometimes number one to even comp is
yeah,
having the ability to determine the shape of one's day. So I think that's an absolutely critical piece. And just to give examples, like at Charter, one of the things we do on our team
uh-huh.
is we are a remote work team to begin with
That's
by
yeah,
necessity, but we have no meeting Fridays. And so there are no
okay, yeah,
internal meetings on the Fridays, so that you can get heads down work done. And there's,
yeah,
you're completely free from that. A simple little thing. We, like a lot of companies, have mental health days that go beyond the standard kind of
yeah,
holidays. And it's the whole company shuts down and it's no one's expected to be on Slack. We do things like user manuals so that when you have a new hire, they know they can both tell you openly
yeah,
and they know what your work style is. So I'm a
okay,
morning person, right? I'm highly effective. Like, I can
that's
really
cool.
handle, thorny problems from, whatever the thing is, from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. All of these things, I think, set conditions that make sure that people are doing their
Yeah.
most productive work in the most productive moments, but also have a little bit of room to recharge and rest when they need to. So
Gosh, I loved all of that. I think I just noted like 20 top things to ask you about. So I feel like we could have an episode just on that. But I think that was a really powerful share. I mean, I cannot agree more. I was on my own personal path of that unsustainable performance where I had to learn a lot of these things and teach myself a different way of thinking because to prove to myself about these it is the Stanford study. I read that as well, that you almost have to see to yourself and I've done different cool things of measuring to show myself in numbers and proof that I really am not superhuman. And you pay for that and you have to balance it out. I was almost doing that for my teams way more than I was doing it for myself, which
mm,
of course I'm not an exception to this. And I had to learn this the hard way. So I really appreciate the really thoughtful answer to that.
yeah. Well, yeah, no, likewise, I've been through the same experience. I've,
Yeah.
done the spreadsheets where it's like, how am I actually spending my time? I
Yeah.
live, I'm commuting distance of New York City and commuted, 4 hours a day for 20 years, 2 hours, door to door, one way. And now I'm remote and I started to track, the lack of productivity that was. And without
Yeah.
exaggeration, I lose 3 hours of productivity anytime I go into New York.
Right. And you maybe even during peak of your high performance wave, right? And so
$100.
it can cost you so much productivity. It's eye-watering really when you actually deep dive into the research, yes, but then also seeing this, like actually looking at yourself as an example. You can't, from my experience, you can't unsee it. And now sharing this message with others because you see so many just heads down with no space in their calendars to think, do work. How do you focus on the outcomes if you haven't that really moved the needle, right? If you haven't had a chance to even identify what those are, like you have to kind of, that's the
Absolutely. Right. And if you do that, sort of, if you take that audit of yourself, like, you start to,
yes,
I think it helps you, to be a more empathic leader as well. Cause you're like, okay, wow, if I struggle with that,
yes,
or if
yes,
I'm losing 3.5 hours of productivity by commuting maybe I shouldn't require people to come into the office 5 days a week,
Yes.
and so this is where it goes back to, again, a phrase I was using at the beginning, like measure outcomes over hours. I think
Yes.
so many managers, assume if they don't see you, you're not working. And
Yeah.
I just think if you have proper goal setting and it's very clear and you're measuring the outcome, then
Yeah. It should be
you
no
know whether
problem.
they're working or not.
Yeah.
And
There's
and and
no,
actually it
yeah.
doesn't matter if
Yeah.
they are, working at 3 in the afternoon or 11 at night, as long as that job is getting done and getting done,
Yeah.
on deadline.
Yeah, I can't agree more. The other thing I really want to pick on a little bit in that part of the question is like I love you bringing in that Gen Z view and Gen Z, plus plus like all the generations that I was also when I first started working with a different generation. At first, I also had this experience of, geez, it's very different, right? And you have that traditional or default thinking. They're looking at things differently. But I love your perspective on that it's not that they don't work hard. And that's why I was like, that was, to me, that never seemed like that was the problem. But I love the fact that they're bringing in a different definition of success, right? Also, a different version of working, but also to their definition of success. I think in many ways, I've kind of developed this viewpoint that they see what our generation has done, and I just use that generally. I'm in my
Sure.
on my mid 40s. Like sometimes it's like to them, it's like that doesn't look great, right? What we're doing, like it's like I don't
Yeah.
want what you have, right? Like, and they're doing it. They're redefining, how they do it and what they're going to, including, taking more time to recharge, be more in tune with some of the energy ups and downs, which we again generally growing up we're not, right? We were just like put your head down, do it, work till it's done, and those arguably did not serve us really well in this way overall. And they're just trying to do it their way and do it, better, right? In a way. So I know it was a bit messy to say that to you, but I love that you brought it your version of it. And I think it's important perspective to share so that we're not judging them somehow. Yeah. We're
Yeah,
in no position
I
to judge.
agree. I mean, this is my next area of personal obsession. So
Oh yeah?
I'm not one of the journalists or researchers at Charter. I'm the business guy. I'm one of the
Right.
business side people. But this has long been an obsession of mine. The multiple generations in the workforce, because
Cool.
again, I feel like I have learned so much from the younger people that have worked for
Hmm.
me over the many years. And I do think that there's truth in both, right? The thing we're talking about is a universal. Every generation has a version of this
Agree.
thing,
Agree.
and everybody acts as though it's the first time they've ever come across, this, that a 20-year-old may not want to work as hard as,
They
a
did.
peak career
Yeah.
40-year-old.
Yeah.
Duh. I didn't either, and I've had a fairly successful career, but was my mind half on like happy hour or a concert I was going to go to or the
Yes.
softball league
Yes.
I was in? Yeah, maybe it was.
Right.
And so I think, to me though, it's building bridges, and we could extrapolate this across all of society, but we won't for now, is building bridges where you get those younger generations to understand that, yeah, like there is some truth to, if you want things that, you know overachievers can have, you're going to have to overachieve a little bit, and there is
Yeah.
sacrifice in that.
Yeah.
But by the same token, to your point, the rest of us not saying, well, just because I had to pay that kind of due, that they have to pay the same dues. Maybe they
Yeah.
don't. Maybe
Hmm.
things have
Maybe
changed,
they
and
don't. Yeah.
there's a different sort of contract there. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, food for thought too. I agree. To me, that's interesting, and I just have my personal perspective and view on that. So, but yeah, I thought to pick your brain a little bit since you're.
Yeah.
I would love to hear. I'm looking forward to seeing where, if you look into it, where this goes. I would love
Thank
to
you.
follow
Yeah.
that. Yeah, for sure. So you've learned. Have you touched on things? So speaking of some of the big numbers that I kind of brought up with that, there is this big like these big numbers on disengagement in the workforce and burnout
Yeah.
retention and worse ever for sure, but even more
Mhm.
concerningly they're trending in the wrong direction. Even as much as we're talking about it and organizations are still investing against it, the results are just not getting better. In fact, they're getting a lot worse. And I know this on the global scale, and I know this from talking to leaders who are measuring this themselves. And sometimes they're really scratching their heads and being like, we're doing all this stuff, even cutting hours. Why are things not getting better?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on this? Again, either from the researcher or from your practical perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's, that data under, I acknowledge
Mhm.
undermines part of what I'm saying when I say, this younger generation, I don't find them to want to be, less hardworking. But disengagement and the level of hard work that you're doing kind of go hand in hand. And I do think like one of the places that this gets back to, which is makes this whole discussion and your podcast kind of critical, is leadership. People get disengaged. The number one reason that people get disengaged or leave a company is bad managers, right? It's they're
Yeah,
working for people that they don't trust. They're not inspired by. They're not learning from. They're not treated well by these people. And I think there's an epidemic of lousy leadership and lousy middle management. Across the globe, arguably.
yeah,
And, I think that's creating disengagement. And part of it is, maybe we don't do, the kinds of, really deliberate management training processes that we used to. I don't think we do actually. Like, I think there's a lot
yeah,
of organic, kick them in the water and
yeah,
like, hey, listen, we're going to throw you in the deep end,
yeah,
figure out how to be a manager. You can maybe do that, with a salesperson. Like, we're going to throw you out in the market and you
yeah,
figure it out, or a marketing person. But a leader, that's a hard thing to do for them to learn on the
yeah,
job. And
yeah,
so I do think that we need to figure out how you train these frontline managers, middle managers, if you're
yeah,
going to get over this epidemic of
yeah,
disengagement.
yeah,
One of the things I've been very, very lucky for being in media is because I think this is the other thing to tap into. I just want to go off on this tangent for a second, but
yeah.
it's important if you have the kind of company that can capitalize on this. If you have a mission, though, that is exciting and motivating, and the example that I'll give you from my old days is I was the publisher of The Atlantic for a period of time. The
Cool.
Atlantic, founded by Ralph Waldo Emerson, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1857 to be a
Super
vehicle
cool.
for the American idea. First place
Hmm.
Hemingway was ever published. And there we were able to hire and retain people at slightly lower rates than sort of the best paying jobs. It was a very,
Yeah,
very difficult job relative to
yeah,
other magazines at the time. But people stayed on our team because one, we had really good managers, and
mm,
two, they were excited about this mission to try to make this magazine that otherwise might have gone out of business in that day central to the national conversation again. And so I think managers who can figure out how to tap into that. What's our purpose here? What's the thing that we're
yes,
doing that's actually meaningful and can translate that back down while deploying all of these other traits that we were talking about so that people feel attended to, that life feels meaningful, that
yeah, yeah,
I'm understood as a
yeah.
human being? I think disengagement starts to.
I mean, I have done a deep dive on this particularly, and I cannot agree more.
Hmm.
I think ultimately we have to go back, like why do people leave? And this is again, well, my work, but sorry, my thoughts, but informed, let's say, for over my own deep dive. But you're right. Like ultimately, people want. I still think fundamentally people want to succeed, right? And
Mhm.
and they want to do the right thing. Fundamentally, they can look wildly different. Now we are still, though, ultimately we are self-serving as humans, like just like any, there's nothing wrong with that, right? So our manager is actually kind of like rules our world in a way, right? Like that's your direct line that sets up you for success, your role, yourself. And if you don't have, so I just agree with that directional, source of engagement that has to come from your manager. Now, looking at, well, where are these managers coming from and why is there such a wide epidemic of really poor middle management? I'm actually empowered to say that now because
Yeah.
everybody just, all these conversations, that's a common thread that comes out. I kind of boil it down to a lot of times like individual contributors go up into middle management based on their like individual success, right? Technical skill sets, expertise in a subject matter. But that's not what a leader makes. It's an element of a leader, right? But you have to have, the some business skills acumen to help to your point, prioritization, outcome based prioritization, connecting strategy to execution in that level and clearing the path for others to deliver on. We just don't have space for that in our calendars. And I say that, there's not to throw the middle management out of the bus. We as humans are
Hmm.
overrun with calendar. Our calendars are around. We don't have the space for that. And then in this day and age, everybody's looking for that support. It's just not there. The managers are not equipped to do their job. And then people looking up to their managers are not getting that support and then ultimately that alignment to the mission and purpose that you talked about, right? That's like as much as the company builds that, it's always going to be up to your team to really make that live, sustain it, bring it to life, right? Like on the day to day, and it's just not happening. uh at scale, I would say. There's pockets of it, like you share examples, but that's, I mean, sorry, I'm gonna have to, it's like,
Yeah, no,
it's your chat, but I have to share, like,
no, it's great to have that reinforced because that's what we see in the research and the data.
yes,
And it's like, as you say, it's like, it's true. I think there's another like sort of tangent from there that's worth companies thinking about. We're not going to resolve it on this particular discussion, but
no,
is the point you're making about ICs, right? Individual contributors. I think it's not incumbent on companies, and HR has a major role to play in this, to come up with other pathways for career growth than
yes,
management,
yes,
because people, the reason ICs very often want to get into manage is, sometimes it's a thoughtless senior leader is like, yeah, that guy's great at this, manager. Other times I've had so much pressure over the years from individual contributors like, so what's next? Now I'm going to be a
yes, yes,
manager.
yes.
And I ask them like, what do I'll ask them why they want to be a manager. The minute I hear that it's about themselves, I'm like, you're going to be a terrible manager because
Or
managing is
salary or something, right? Like, you're like,
right.
oh, get to the
Managing is
next
coaching.
level. Yeah,
Well, it's all of it. It's salary, it's ego, it's,
yes,
showing growth on your
yes.
LinkedIn profile, whatever it is. But I've had so many, great individual contributors I've been able to advance by giving them either more autonomy,
Yeah, yeah,
project-based stuff that you can do on an individual basis. And I think AI can help with this, that you don't necessarily have to manage people. Because
yeah,
the thing that people ICs who don't really think it through don't realize is good managers, management is about them, is about the people reporting to you. It's not
yes.
about you.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
it's
if
your
you
team.
don't
It's
know
all about your team and your team outcomes and all of that. It's just
exactly, and there are two
completely
pieces
different.
to it. There are two pieces to it that I think are often not recognized. One is that it's a hell of a lot more about giving than ordering. Like you walk
Yes.
around, if you do it right and do it well, you're going to walk around all day long with the baggage that everybody else is bringing. And are you ready to do that? Is that a thing you want
Yeah.
to do? Two is, it is terrifying if you're a terrific individual contributor where your success is in your own hands. It is terrifying. Let's say you start with a team of four. Now your success is based on these four people who you can't control
Yes.
doing
Yes.
their job. And I find ICs are often completely unmoored by this. They're like, wait a minute,
Yes.
I'll just do it. Well, that's bad
Yeah.
managing. That's
No,
not what
that's
we're
terrible.
asking you
Yeah,
to
that's
do.
that's what those poor people believe that they're like, now you're gonna have turnover problem.
Right.
No,
So
I can
unless it's clear to them that that's where they're headed, I think
yeah.
very often ICs are in for a real shock when they get into
But that
management.
comes back to your original point about the fact that we are not educating on what leadership actually is. So people
100%.
coming up don't know about that next step. And it can act like exactly, first of all, they're pushed into it because of, and I can't again agree more about lack of other paths for growth. I used to come at this from I came at this from my, like a tech. I came up through tech. I'm an software engineer by my first training. Like, that feels like a really long time ago, but where I started my career, and I could see even early on, like it's like there's just tech develop, software engineers who are individual contributors, and then you can see that they are forced into management unless they just want to stay still, and it's just. So I used to start talking about this, like technical talent needs different paths up that are not into management. Like, cause it's just, you can actually, rock the bad move like that, you lose that high performer and you lose the team, like just like to your point, right?
Exactly.
And so that's really the pack of, like, we're just not clear on, what is leadership like at different levels
Right.
proactively so that everybody can make better decisions and, ultimately amplify and grow with individual success, not lose traction or feel diminished somehow through
Right.
their growth. So it's all interconnected complicatedly.
It is. Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The human condition.
Yeah, that's right. That's what gives us lots to talk about always. So it's great. So I really appreciated learning from your perspective on it and around this. So I wonder, and I like to end on a I like to ask, give everybody a magic wand, I would say, because it
Oh
also
gosh.
forces us into that, prioritization, outcome based prioritization. Considering the state of affairs today, and kind of what best guess at the future, if you could use your magic wand to create a capability that organizations really just need to own and have these days to help themselves forward, what would be the one thing that you would just say, okay, this is what I will use my superpower on?
Capability, what the one
Yeah,
capability?
just one. I mean, it's a wide range of here. I give you lots of,
Yeah.
just,
Probably
mhm,
one we really haven't touched on much here, but I think again they all kind of
yeah,
contribute to it is and not saying anything new, maybe even here, but like, is resilience slash perseverance. I
Yeah,
think, we can have these theoretical conversations all we want. And the fact is that no life trajectory, company trajectory, career trajectory is, a straight line up and to the right, right?
yeah,
It is jagged.
yeah,
It's jagged. And I think you just have to, as an individual, as a team, as an organization, you have to have the stamina to climb the hills when they come, because
yeah,
they're going to come. And I think, I just disengagement risks that, risks
yeah,
you not being able to climb the next hill. And so if I can wave the magic wand and have, create the most successful company slash team slash division, it would be that, as like,
yeah.
who's the most perseverant here?
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Learn and go. Learn from what you just did and kind of step in a better direction and just keep going. I love it. That's a really good use of the wand, I have to say.
Good. Yeah. All right. I'm glad to hear that.
I totally agree. Well, Jay, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. I love the points that you raised, and I'm so happy that you were here to share your findings and your thoughtful approach to sharing this information with organizations out there. So thank you
Sure.
so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. No, but really fun to talk about these things and to
Yes.
be with you here. And thanks for having me on.
Yes, absolutely.